Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. Beautiful day. A little hot. It's okay. Before we get started, I'll ask Brother Gene McGee if he would to lead us in prayer. Gene.
Let us pray. Dear kind Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for another beautiful day you've given us. Thank you for allowing us to be here this morning to study another portion of thy word. Pray, Brother Dave, that he'll have a ready recollection of those things he has prepared for him. And us as students will pay attention and learn those things from your word you would have us to do. Continue to be with our elders, be with the sick and afflicted of our congregation, restore them to their much wanted health. Watch over us now and care for us, forgive us any sins. Bless and wish in Christ's name. Amen.
Okay. Does anybody remember where we were last week? What were we talking about last week? 10 Commandments. Correct? Exactly right. We actually talked a little bit about the thou shalt not kill. We won't go into a lot of detail because we've already covered it. But there is definitely a difference between killing and murder. The Harag, the slayer, put to death, and Reshash was to murder. In this case, the translation really better off would be thou shalt not murder. It's also important to realize that God's instruction in the Old Testament and New Testament, y'all, I apologize, I know so many times about this. These allergies are killing me, I'm sorry. I do everything I know to do before I get here, and it just still doesn't work. Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for the image of God, in the image of God made mankind. Romans 13:4, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers who do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. I think something else is interesting is there's eight centurions that are listed, and without exception, every one of them appears in favorable light. Not once did either John the Baptist or any other apostle ever suggest that they give up service in the Roman army. It was never suggested, so it was considered to be a noble thing, which brings us to thoughts of today, our police officers that protect us, our military that protect us. When they have to do things that I know they don't want to do, we've got to realize that what they do is not murder. It's not the same as someone that's taken an innocent life. We'll be talking about that during the day. The next commandment, 7th, thou shalt not commit adultery. The sin of adultery is against several parties. First and foremost, it's against God. God made it very clear that man was not to commit adultery. But the very bodies of the sinners that are involved are infected. The family of those affected and our entire society is affected. Probably all of us have war stories and sad stories about what's going on in some of our families, how adultery has torn our families apart. We won't go into great detail about that because we all know the pain that brings. I think it's very important, though, that I bring out one thing. Sometimes I think it's not intentional. We'll have sermons that are preached about adultery, but we fail to mention that in some cases there is an innocent party. I think it's very important that we remember that there are people that have had adultery committed against them that are certainly innocent. I think we've got to be cautious and careful how we throw the word around and make sure we understand from a biblical standpoint that there are innocent parties. Obviously, any comments you have, please raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. We'll get to Miss Nancy.
When you say families, I know you're talking about, I guess you were talking about families like your family and my family, or any of us that have families. But also, committing adultery, also, it hurts church families. The church as a family. I don't, and you probably meant that too, but it does hurt the church family when somebody in the church that you think a whole lot of, and you know they commit adultery.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if you were talking about that, but I think that's a good thing to think of too.
Very valid point. Yes, ma'am. Very, very valid. The next commandment, thou shalt not steal. That's the eighth, excuse me, that's the eighth commandment. Some of this is just common sense, I realize. What is stealing? Theft, fraud, dishonesty, larceny, swindling, cheating, embezzlement, violations of trust, robbery, inaccurate tax returns, non-payment of debts, shoplifting. We could go on and on. We all know what that is. And God's very clear that that's not acceptable. We see, unfortunately today, looting going on, and people are almost proud that they can loot and tear things up and rob and steal things that's not theirs. It's sad that people are not ashamed of that, it doesn't seem many times anymore. The ninth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. What does that mean? Don't tell a lie. It can be things such as perjury, slander. It can be false advertising. It can be libel. We are not just speaking of the testimony in courts here either, of course. It's talking about Pharisees in their view thought one could tell as many lies as they like to if they were not sworn in. That was kind of the custom of the day. But we know that God says you should not bear false witness against your neighbor. Thou shalt not covet. I wrote a note here that this is one that seems to be very easily overlooked by me, by maybe all of you in the audience or some of you in the audience. Not intentionally, but sometimes coveting because there's things that we don't have that maybe somebody else does have. It's really logical that this one would follow number 9. It says here basically not only should we not steal from others, we shouldn't even strongly desire to have what they want in a malicious and sinful way. Stealing is the outward result of inward coveting. Really it is. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5 tells us how serious God is about this commandment. For this ye know that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. When the covetous man is mentioned with the other sins that are mentioned here, it's very clear that God is very serious about that being a sin that he does not appreciate. Any comments? Yes, Wynn. Wynn. Oh, I'm sorry.
One thing I think about is, we've got these 10 commandments, but, this is not everything God says on these subjects. I mean, if you go in Leviticus, there's chapters and chapters, of, laws regarding all these different commandments and exactly what they mean. And, so sometimes, I think, we look at these, in isolation from the rest of the law of Moses, but these are just, basically, a shorthand, that the law of Moses is all based on. There's a whole lot more, depth to these commands that aren't shown right here in these verses.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to cover some of that in the book of Exodus itself. So let's read verses 18 and 19, Greg, please.
All the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. Then they said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but let not God speak to us, or we will die."
God's intention here was that this event stay in the minds of the witnesses that are there. And we see how he did it with thunder and lightning. The people were very content to just allow Moses to be the one to speak to God and not themselves, because it said they had fear of death. Verse 20, please, Greg.
Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin."
So Moses made certain the people knew and understood both the love of God and also the power of God. They've witnessed both, have they not, since they've been in Egypt, since they left Egypt. 21 through 26, Greg.
So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. You shall not make other gods besides me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. You shall make an altar of earth for me. You shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness will not be exposed on it."
What's he talking about here? Anybody? You remember that all throughout the centuries, the Egyptians had placed in front of the Israelites false gods. And that was probably totally embedded into the Israelites. What God is saying here is, I want you to sacrifice on ground. On just the ground, on dirt. Now, if you want to use some rocks, you can. But I don't want you to use hewn stones, things that you make, because what might happen is you might worship the altar instead of what is being sacrificed. I think that's what he's saying here. It says, in every place where I record my name is where this will happen. And the answer to that is, where is that? What does he mean in every place? Well, we know that later in the wanderings, the tabernacle was moved from place to place. And God's name is recorded at every place that the tabernacle was moved from and to. Verse 25, an altar could be made of stone rather than dirt, but it was not to be such that, again, that men were inclined to worship it as opposed to worshiping God. Verse 26, anybody have an answer as to what's going on here? Neither shalt thou go up by steps unto mine altar, that thy nakedness be not discovered thereon. What does he mean by that? Anybody have any idea? The altar was not to have steps, but be a gradual incline. And the purpose for this is it would prevent the priest who wore loose robes, and obviously nothing under those robes, it prevented them from displaying their nakedness to those people that were worshiping at lower level beneath the high place. So that's why no steps, it appears, and why we have a gradual incline. Anything else through verse 20, or excuse me, at the end of chapter 20? Let me interrupt real quick and say this. I mentioned this a couple, 3 weeks ago, that my concern is the intricate parts of Exodus. If we're not careful, I can bog the class down, and I don't want to do that. However, I think it's really important to realize how serious God is about His commandments. They're so intricate, the things that we're getting ready to read about, that I thought we're going to cover some of this, because I think it's important that we see how simple New Testament Christianity is compared to what these people had to do to please God. Why we call it the law of liberty? Because we have the liberty that was provided to us through Christ. The law is so much easier now than the old law. So bearing that in mind, let's go ahead and go into chapter 21. This chapter presents several rights of various kinds. It elaborates on the application of the Ten Commandments. It's kind of like the Bill of Rights we have today. Here's some of the things that were given as things that need to be understood. Rights of male slaves, rights of female slaves, rights of the accused, rights of those suffering punishment, rights of persons dismembered, rights of persons wounded or killed by animals, the rights of persons suffering from willful negligence on the part of others. Let me state real quick, too, that when we think in this country, unfortunately, we decided many years ago that it was okay to own men and women and treat them in an unfair way. This is not talking about black people only, because during that time, you'll see that slaves were not just of the black race, but they were of other races, and the reason they became slaves, we're going to talk about that. So keep that in mind as we move along. Verses 1 through 6, please.
Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the seventh he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God. Then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently.
Bert Kaufman also says this, I'm going to just quote what he said, the inherent protection certified to such minorities as women, slaves, and the accused, which was guaranteed by these divine pronouncements, must be held as the greatest Bill of Rights ever known upon earth at so early a period of time. And I think we're going to find some information here that that proves that point. First of all, how did one become a slave? 2 Kings chapter 4 tells us he could sell himself to get out of debt. And then in Nehemiah chapter 5, he could be sold by his parents because they need money. So that's two of the ways that a person could become a slave. Let's talk about a little bit about the rights of, kind of summarize what we just read. No slave was to serve more than 6 years unless they volunteered to do so. In the 7th year, he was free, or every 15 years when the year of Jubilee came. If it happened to come before the 4 years was concluded, he went free then. He would leave as soon as he came. The wife could go with him, but if the master had given him a wife and she bare children, all of them had to stay with the master when the 6 years were up. Does that make sense? So if there was a slave, and let me read it one more time. Wife could go with him if the master had given him a wife and she bore children. Now let's talk about number 4. But this person could stay with his family if he desired. If he stayed, the master required to make it public record. The sign of him belonging to the master forever was for his ear to be placed against a post, most likely, possibly in the tabernacle, and be bore through this. It would pin him to the doorpost. It would simply signify that he was the permanent property of the master, and he was not to ever leave his master at this point. That's the illustration, which is kind of silly, but it draws the point home that a person would be nailed to the tabernacle door. In Psalms chapter 40, verse 6, but if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl. Then he will be a servant for life. Some of the little things that were pointed out by this Bill of Rights allowed a family to stay together if they chose to do so in this case. Y'all help me out. Any comments? Anybody at all? Jim's not here today, so I need somebody to catch up my slack for me. Verses 7 through 11, Greg.
If a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he will not do these 3 things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money.
Okay, so if a woman was given to an owner's son as a wife, those particular women then had the status of daughterhood, which was very important at that time. They also had the right of returning to their father's home in case their master took another wife and denied them the 3 basic rights of food, cohabitation, and clothing. And in this case, she also had the right to her freedom without the return of the purchase money that had been given to her. Any comments? So that covers the male slaves and that covers the female slaves at this point. Let's go ahead and read 12 through 14.
He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hands, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. If, however, a man acts presumptuously towards his neighbor, so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar, that he may die.
Just as in our society today, there are times when people are accused of a crime that they're not guilty of it. The most heinous, of course, would be that of murder. Sometimes we see documentaries where someone was falsely accused and found guilty, and many years later, because of DNA testing or some type of evidence that came up, then those people have been able to be set free. And to protect against the unjust punishment of one who had committed a crime like that, God appointed a place. And what was that place called? One more time. Cities of refuge, sanctuary cities, you call them either one. But that's what he did, and they were able to go to those areas for protection during the time when, I guess, evidence was being gathered together. It appears the place to go to seek refuge might have been the altar of the tabernacle that would soon be established after entering Canaan. Joshua established the cities of refuge himself. In Numbers chapter 35, we read about the cities of refuge. Actually, 6 were appointed as cities, and they had specific rules established regarding their use and the rights and restrictions that applied to the manslayer. 15 through 17, please.
He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. He who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death.
15 through 17, Greg.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
I skipped 15, didn't I? He who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. He who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death.
So what are the 3 categories that would not be allowed to use the city of refuge? We just mentioned them. What were the 3? Read it again, Greg.
He who strikes his father or his...
That's 1. Strikes his mother or father, you're not going to be able to go to the city of refuge. Go ahead, Greg, sorry.
He who kidnaps a man.
Okay. If you kidnap a man, you don't have the right to go to the city of refuge. And the last one?
He who curses his father or mother.
Wow. That was serious. That was serious. The reason the place of refuge was not available to them, of course, is because breaking of any of these commands was death. 18 through 19, please.
If men have a quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but remains in bed, if he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. He shall only pay for his loss of time and shall take care of him until he is completely healed.
Some of these things, according to today's society, are going to be hard for us to understand. I realize that. But here's the rights protected here. There are two things: the right to be free of the charge of murder unless the man died, and second, the right of the injured in such a fight to be compensated for lost time and doctor's bills due to injuries resulting from the fight. And yet the person that did the fighting that caused the injury was not charged with any crime. He just had to pay the restitution. We don't hear enough about victims' rights today. A murder victim's picture cannot be used in a murder's trial. Sometimes the principle of victims' rights is not honored as it should be. And of course, we in this country, we believe in innocent until proven guilty. Convicted criminals should be made to make restitution of some type and done more expediently in our court systems today, in my humble opinion. 20 and 21, please.
If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod, and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property.
You know, these two verses, again, seem really unusual to us in our society today. We have to understand the thinking of the culture at that time. This was a protective right granted to slaves that they could not be beaten to death. That's what it boils down to. The Roman law, even down to the apostles' time, allowed that slaves could be treated very inhumanely at the time. Penalties could be handed down to slaves by their masters for even the smallest and most trivial things. Masters could beat their slaves and did so many times in the presence of other slaves. Here God is stating that the master should be held accountable for his action and should be punished. So God sees this as being wrong. But we know in that society it took place. So that's one of the protections. In verse 21, read that again, Greg, would you please?
If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property.
Y'all get that? So if I beat my slave and he's only down for a day or two, I'm not going to be charged with anything because I didn't kill him. So that's what he's saying, right? Now, we can think wrong, right, or indifferent, but that's what it said, and that's what was acceptable at that time in that culture. Any comments? Y'all are sure quiet. Y'all aren't sleeping on me, are you? Verses 22 through 25.
If men struggle with each other and strike a woman with a child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then he shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise.
So if a pregnant woman is struck while two men are fighting, and she delivers her child prematurely, but she and the baby are okay, then the only thing that would happen is the man who struck the woman had to pay retribution to the husband of the pregnant woman. And actually, that husband had the right to determine what that would be. Of course, it was reviewed and determined by a judge, but the husband was one that would say, here's what I think this man needs to pay me for the damage that you caused my wife. However, if the baby or the mother are killed, then a life for a life was the answer. Two men are fighting and a woman's hurt and killed, and the baby's killed, either one or the other, then it'd be a life for life. The old philosophy, there's a huge improvement from the most primitive and debased societies before. The older philosophy was this: if you kill my child, I will kill your child, I'll kill your family, I'll kill your whole generation. If you knock out my tooth, I'll knock out all your teeth, and I'll gouge out your eyes if possible. That was kind of the philosophy. This was a new law called lex talionis, and it limited the effect or the amount of revenge. It gradually led to the substitution of monetary penalties for other more harsh type of penalties. 26 and 27.
If a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth of his male or female slave, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth.
So the freedom that a person could get is if a tooth was knocked out, or if an eye was put out, or an eye of a maid was put out, eye of a servant was put out, the master had to release that person. They would be free at that time. Verses 28,
I want to go back one to the abortion or the woman that was pregnant, and that kind of speaks to the abortion issue, I think. Okay, so they're having a fight and the child dies. It looks to me like the man could be executed, right? He killed the child.
Yes.
So that unborn child is considered a human being.
I am so grateful that you brought that out. Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. The perfect example of how God cherishes that infant in the womb, no doubt. And thank goodness, I think possibly, some of our country has made a direction that's positive in that regard. Still got a long way to go, obviously, if it happens at all. But at least we're seeing maybe some advancement of people that abhor the very thought of killing a child in the womb. You know, we think about children that were sacrificed to Baal, and we think how horrible and how terrible. If you read that to somebody today, they'd say, "How could you do that?" And it's no difference in what we're doing today. Can I say this as well? I have known of women that have had abortions that I've talked with, and they are truly sorry. They are truly repentant. So it's kind of like when we talk about adultery, when we talk about abortion, we got to realize that there are people that make mistakes, terrible mistakes, but if God has forgiven them, then we do the same. So we got to be really, I think, cautious how we throw that around. I've heard a preacher say before that they are murderers, and they are. But again, I just think there are people that make that mistake. If they remedy that mistake with God, and they're, again, truly repentant of what they've done, then fortunately, because of God's plan, they can move forward with their lives. Anything else through verse 27? 28 through 32 is kind of odd. It talks about the protection of men against animals. 28 through 32, Greg.
If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. If, however, an ox has previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. Whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned.
So I think in essence, in summary, we just have to note that the death penalty could be invoked on someone if they persistently allowed an animal to roam and they knew that that animal was dangerous. If it killed a person, then they would be violating it, and they could be put to death for that very reason. Verse 32 tells the amount. A slave's death required a fine of 30 shekels, which is about $15 to $20, and the ox's death. Doesn't put a lot of value on human life. Verse 33 and 34, Greg, please.
If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his.
So if you dig a hole in the ground and another man's ox falls in it and dies, the one who dug that hole pays for that oxen. It suggested these holes were cisterns that held water, of course, for humans and animals to use at the time. Verse 35. Let's go ahead and do 35 and 36 together, Greg.
If one man's ox hurts another's so that it dies, Then they shall sell the live ox and divide its price equally, and also they shall divide the dead ox. Or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his.
Okay, so we got, obviously, we understand that animals roam freely. Fences were not real common at the time. So if two oxen fought and one killed the other, they were to sell the one that lived and share the money so that each shared in the loss. Interesting. If the owner knew that an ox had gored others in the past and he neglected to keep him confined, he was to give the owner of the dead ox an ox to replace it. You see how intricate, small things that God thinks is important in the Old Testament, how much more he thinks it's important for us today. We are moving right along. We are ready for chapter 22. Any comments through chapter 21? All right. Let's go ahead and read 1 through 6, Greg, please.
If a man sells an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If what he stole is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. If a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare, and lets his animal loose so that it grazes in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes so that stacked grain or the standing grain or the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution.
Okay, so may I summarize, try to quickly. We must assume that the number of ox versus sheep had to do with value because it was more sheep. Sheep were more valuable than oxen, evidently. Regardless, it was not sufficient to simply replace the animal by another one like it. If a person was killed while breaking into a property at night, the person who killed the thief was not to be killed. But here's what's interesting. If the thief broke in and attempted to steal during the daytime, he was not to be killed. He was to be restored greater value than that which he stole. If he did not have any means to meet his requirements, then he would be sold as a slave to compensate for the damage that he had done. If the stolen livestock were found in his possession, he had to restore double. Deliberate acts of turning out animals into another man's field to eat, careless or not, the results was the same. It was not acceptable. Okay, 7 through 9.
If a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it is stolen from the man's house, if the thief is caught, he shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox, for donkey, for sheep, for clothing, or for any lost thing about which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before the judges. He whom the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor.
So, unlike today where we go and we make a deposit at the bank and we entrust that bank to take care of our money, during times like that, banks were unknown. Property and money were sometimes placed in the care of others that they trusted. In that case, the thief, if caught, had to pay double. So the person that was trusted became a thief. In case the thief wasn't found, a judge would determine if possibly the one entrusted had stolen the property and blamed someone else. If the judge finds the entrusted guilty, he paid double also. So if a person is holding my property and he claims it's gone, and he finds out that he actually gave the property or let somebody else steal the property, then at that point, he had to pay double back to the person that asked him to keep the property for him. 10 through 13.
If a man gives his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep for him, and it dies or is hurt or is driven away while no one is looking, an oath before the Lord shall be made by the two of them that he has not laid hands on his neighbor's property, and its owner shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is actually stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is all torn to pieces, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn to pieces.
See, that my question is here was, why would a neighbor be willing to help a neighbor out with the possible situation? Because what it boils down to is, I'm gonna let my neighbor take care of some of my livestock. If it was determined that the livestock had been stolen because of the carelessness of the one that had been charged to take care of that animal, then he was to be held responsible. He had to give recompense back to that person that owned that property, probably at that point, obviously, oxen. If it could be proven that wild animals had attacked the animal, then the keeper was not responsible. But just an irresponsibility of taking care of someone else's possessions, if they were not responsible enough, then they had to take care of paying for it. We're going to get through this, guys. One more chapter of this. 14 and 15, Greg.
If a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while its owner is not with it, he shall make full restitution. If its owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hire.
So if one borrowed an animal and it got hurt, the borrower was to pay back the owner. This is the case if the owner was not present to protect his property, for example. The owner would be expected to aid in the protection of the stock when this happened. 16 and 17, Greg.
If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and lies with her, he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the dowry for virgins.
So the man that persuaded the unmarried and unengaged young woman to have sexual intercourse had made a really serious mistake, because if the woman's father found out about it, the man who had committed this sin had to pay the marriage price. If the father was willing to allow the two to marry, the man was to take the woman as his wife, no choice. But if the father refuses, he still had to pay the money which would have been paid for a wife. Whatever that amount was, I don't know. So it was serious. Verse 18.
You shall not allow a sorceress to live.
They claimed to be able to communicate with evil spirits and enlist their help in destroying enemies, so that's why they were not allowed. 19.
Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death.
Today we call that beast. I think it's called bestiality. And of course, it's a crime against nature. Verse. Let's go on and get a few verses here. We got about 3 minutes left. Let's go up through verse 24. 20 through 24.
He who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict them at all, and if he does cry out to me, I will surely hear his cry, and my anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless.
So in verse 21, we read about strangers. We'll pick that up next week. Thank you for your comment, Miss Nancy. Thanks very much.